Good morning, everyone. My name is Paul, and my last name is Y-I-H. Sounds like Yi. Um, the spelling of my last name is Y-I-H was made in the early 60s when my family was departing from China into Hong Kong, then Macau, and eventually to Brazil. However, the name today should be spelled as Y-E or Y-E-H. The purpose of my engagement today is basically about my development in the area of counseling psychology, formerly under the umbrella of educational psychology. And I have left the academia in the mid 1970s, 76, 77, when my wife and I have opened up our business here in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. But prior to that, I have spent my graduate school years in 74 and 75, where in the area starting at that time of the multicultural education, with the many multicultural education centers around the state of Wisconsin. I guess we were one of the earliest or pioneers to establish the multicultural educational center at Platteville, Wisconsin at that time. It was interesting because at the very same time I was a assistant to the dean of students working with the international student body at the college campus. Also, I was the assistant soccer coach, where at the same school I've played for 4 years. So I know my environment very well in regarding the multicultural, and then to moving into the early area where I had labeled it as cross-cultural psychology. What is the difference between multicultural and cross-cultural? And in this coming videos, I'll be trying to do the clarification. What is the difference? How can we distinguish the two ideas, the two thoughts? And better yet, in the future presentations, you'll see more the way I'm emphasizing the cultural spheres, the many images I'll be presenting along this video, as you shall see the various forms and shapes where the spheres you can merge, you can interface, you can stack, you can make one of the cultural spheres of my early age. I talk about tonal language, the sound, the hearing, and you can expect that sphere into a column, and then you interface how in my life I play with this early recollections. But most importantly for today, I'm 76 years old, and I'm loving it, embracing this era of the digital period history of our time, and the tremendous amount of the available resources and tools and technologies will enable us to not to make life better, to make education more affordable. With communication like today, we can be sharing part of my history, my personal life, in that realm, in the cultural sphere of the cross-cultural psychology, the cross-cultural communications, and then what had led me to, in what I have created in 1970, to vote with a sound metric and measurable results in the field of counseling psychology, and how that had impacted bringing me back and forth through the cultures for my Western journey since 1962 when I was 14, moving from Asia, Macau, Hong Kong to Brazil, and from Brazil to North America. And then with my schooling, my bachelor's and my master's degree, terminated in 74, employment in 76. But abruptly in 1977, my wife and I, Kathy, have decided to venture on into a global, extremely international business with our engagement of the gemstones, jewelry, minerals, collection, antiquity, where we started here in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin in 77, have ventured on for this last 45 years. Back to the idea of two spheres. There was an economic spheres. We took the action to become business, and that's one economic area. But at the very same time, we have to look at that as my personal investment or my doctoral. After 45 years, after the level, like any business, you have your ups, you have your downs, and then you have a level of, and you implement new skills, you learn new skills. Like 1991, we're starting having involvement with the internet, and also the very same time acquiring the software from Microsoft's Words and Microsoft Spreadsheets, and that had ever since already creating the first impact from a traditional mama and papa business store into the global scenes. And then along with all the technologies of the logistics changes, the incoming, the fax machines, I still remember I paying $3,000 per machine just to have one in Sao Paulo, one in Minas Gerais, where my headquarters in Brazil, and then one in Hong Kong, and one here in Wisconsin. In the meantime, I became a very strong associate with the Germans in Ida Oberstein, and then via this development, in 1 year, we have spent $15,000 on the fax machine. And 20 years later, the same fax machine costing us today maybe $150. Okay. Also moving technologically from the time we have telex machine with the fax machine and the computer, the image transfer. I think the emphasis today, I'm talking about technologies, how that had impact our life, how it had continued to impacting at this time, this moment, with the arrival of the digital era. We talk about artificial intelligence. I using my own terms, I call it big data and big cloud, the capacity of storage, and also very uniquely, I call it myself the quantum tabulation, the calculation. And this alone will bring our mom and pop business from the very rough stage. We actually become from retail to wholesales in the industry. And from the wholesale, we are back to the global distribution on the upfront, bringing the industry from Brazil to the U.S., spreading in the U.S., Europe, and then went into China, went into Hong Kong. We were the first of the major exhibitors in Hong Kong. I think in 1983, there was only 26 of us showing colored gemstones. It's not even jewelry. And today, in Hong Kong become a Miller organization of the gem show. And the present day Hong Kong Gem and Jewelry Show is it's an exhibit involving 2,000 exhibitors. But it was at that time, in the early 80s, we had moving from retail to wholesale. It's very simple. It's very pragmatic. We had our retail business, and we wanted to visit the annual gem shows in Tucson, Arizona, and the following year we become involving the exhibits along with the extra stones and gems and minerals we have with us. And from that 1 year to two, what is amazing is that the sizable business where we have done in one period of 10 days an exhibition, the volume of the business is like covered the entire year. Using the numbers, if we do $200,000 business in the retail area, and we have actually doing $200,000 business, basically with the same margin, up or down, a little bit variation. So in what we talk about changings of technology, we're also talking about the changing of our status. Not revolution, but evolution. And by the same token, why I'm coming back, not particularly in the academia, but to see the applied use of psychology and the cross-cultural psychology, where I have started with three spheres. I will using the sphere term called 3 C's. The first one is called the communication dynamics. The second one is called the communication analytica. It's analyzing the communication between the two, but both communication dynamics and communication analytica happens in the sphere, I call it the cultural sphere. And that particular cultural sphere, namely, is the university or the education foundation, educational area where I work with all my students, be that international students coming from Saudi Arabia, with very high support for the government. At that time, it's like $20,000 or $30,000 a year, versus the incoming multicultural students, or the city urbanites, be that Black students, Latino students, and then eventually the cultural diversity involving the women's studies. It just happened, not just at Platteville, UW Platteville, but the mandate of the federal government at that time had also expanded to all the other universities. But we were very active at Platteville, in part maybe because we're already having one side by my work with the international students, foreign students, and the domestic students with a different diversity background, culturally speaking. So what I am sharing with you today is to give you the ideas, and what I would term it and say that in bits and pieces of culture. You may wonder, I'm talking about how we left university at 77, opening our business, and in these 45 years, I have continued on with my personal research about cultures, about people, about the diversity of the educational system I have learned and I have earned. And in this particular course, I will also mention who are the major catalysts that influence myself, my study, my observation, and how the cross-cultural psychology and cross-cultural communication are being developed even now. And from that area of the 3 C's, once again, communication dynamics, communication analytica, host, joining with the cultural sphere, namely education. And in this particular concept and idea, I developed a lot of success in 1974, then using the 76, 77, and with other consultancy I do on the side in the early 80s. That evolution of the 3C system had given me today with the development in which I call the psychology of round and square. One more track back to my 16 years old when I finished my junior high school in Brazil, ready to head into the high school. In Brazil at that time, they have 2 separate divisions: Científico, go in the field of science, or Clássico, or go into the area of classic studies, very likely education, become teachers and whatnot, and the Científico become science. I was very engaged with a very good schooling early on with the Roman Catholic order or the Salesians. Most of you know of the founder Don Bosco or Giovanni Bosco. In that particular time and moment, I already had my idea focused on I want to be involved in education. In the very short period of time, in a small internal boarding school between Sao Paulo state, city of Sao Paulo, and the city of Rio. There was in 1974, 75, 70, 60, think about 64, 65 in that era. If you can recall at that time, also much of the dynamic happening in Brazil. We were immigrants, got to Brazil in 62, and then you had the dynamic city being built in a modern era designed by Oscar Niemeyer, who designed also UN. Brasilia became the new capital, and the old comfort zone of Rio de Janeiro, the wonderful beaches, the many times I walked through the beach of Ipanema, Leblon as a teenager, where the song hits us with the girls from Ipanema. In that particular time of change between Sao Paulo and Rio, and happened also in 64, another very, very not so pleasant with the Brazilians overthrowing João Goulart, the president, and then with the 20 years following the military regime in Brazil. But what is interesting, I lived in an area where the everyday transit of the military equipment or soldiers. I went to school in Lorena. It's a city exactly 250 kilometers to Sao Paulo city, which is about 3.5 hours by bus. Also the same distance going to Rio. In an area called the Vale do Paraíba. It's a most interesting time of my life in the very short time, 3 years in that particular school. The visitation of the many missionaries and the Salesians. I'm highlighting that their involvement and engagement in this province called Mato Grosso, where one of the dominant Brazilian tribes called the Chavantes, and plus others were engaged with the Roman Catholic education. In particular, in 1965, I was more impressed when we received news of one of the missionary priests were killed in the region. Not because of that particular impact, but it was already in my time and period engaged with the Salesians orders in Brazil. I have set my objectives or my goals to visit the different cultures other than our established Western or Eastern or urbanite, My father was a graduate from the Sorbonne, Paris. In my father's younger days, also had his, what I call adventurous ventures by leaving for Paris by way of the Siberian railways, going from maybe Shanghai, I'm just thinking about Shanghai to Harbin to Vladivostok, crossing the Siberia, heading into Moscow, Hamburg, Berlin, eventually in Paris. And my father's early settlement had gone into Brazil was in 1952. At that particular time and point, I was still left behind in Shanghai, where I was born in 1948. But the Brazilian 4 to 5 years, why I have gone to school from 62 to leaving Brazil in 68 spring to come to college, it was one of the richest, living under the most cultural diverse area in the city of Sao Paulo, having some of my Chinese friends, Brazilian friends, my Chinese friends attending the American school, chapel, and the other attending to the British school, the graded school. Some had gone to St. Paul. Mixtures of our cultural diversity and linguistically. My mother tongue is Cantonese, but I was born in Shanghai. We share the language of Shanghai. We share the language of Cantonese, and this is a part of the composition of the cultural spheres, because it takes nothing for me to walk into a room where my father's communicating with Francois, the wife, another Chinese partner, schoolmate of my dad, who had gone to Brazil, is speaking in French. When my mother and the other Chinese ladies are playing mahjong, it was a mixture of Shanghai and Cantonese. And then to step out the door, go to the Portuguese grocers, there is the Portuguese. Across the street to my friends' neighbors from Lebanon, the Lebanese, and the hospitality, the food, the sharing, and all that. And often in different time and period, they were shifting back to the language, Arabic, Lebanese, and also French. So it was not shocking when you can walk into the different cultural spheres in my childhood, from Shanghai to Macau to Hong Kong to Brazil. And all these are shapes and formatting what I have created, the psychology of round and square. The psychology of round and square, as you shall see on the screen, is coming out from the communication dynamics and the communication Analytica, except that I'm taking this a step almost cultural anthropological by my reflecting why and how I used the spheres without knowing it. And by now I recognize how that have happened, and that had led me into my interest of a cultural anthropology, culture and people in Brazil, especially with the indigenous. And over this past 10 years, I have very much engaged with the various Brazilian tribes in the situation where we offer consultancy, helping them developing an economic culture. And I have traveled to Rondônia to meet with the Cintas Largas 6 years ago. People say, why are you going so far? These are very, very hard places. 2 years before I've gone there, the Cintas Largas, in their reservation called Roosevelt Reservation, which is the reservation created by Theodore Roosevelt Reservation. And the conflict had led to the killing of some of the adventurers in the field of mining. We call it garimpeiros. However, we have come to some of the very interesting terms by propositioning, working with the Chinese, the incoming Chinese, in search of area of agriculture. And in the middle of the savannah, inside of the jungles, speaking of deforestation, there are many open areas, like an open pampas, the low grass flatland that can be used for cultivation. I know many of you will say, wait a minute, how do you feel about the ecology, the deforestation? There is that. Those are situations that have happened. And then later on, I went into another group with the Yanomamis, which by my region, I've gone to the upper Rio Negro, to the city of São Gabriel de Cachoeira, which stationed with one of my old best friend, become the bishops of the Indians, Don Song, S-O-N-G, or Don Song, as we say in Brazil. what I'm trying to say, in this 45 years of our business engaging with the gemstones, the raw minerals, the this venture had actually given me what I really wanted when I was a teenager, to see the parts of Brazil, cities, regions, the culture in Bahia, the Nordeste, the Northeast, where Paulo Freire come from, had again another echo of psychology and culture. And Paulo Freire is what he had impressed me, is his dedication in working with the poor of the illiterates. And then he was influenced furthermore by Darcy Ribeiro's, Brazilian cultural anthropologist, who wrote O Povo Brasileiro, the Brazilian people. And he was shaking his hand vividly in the videos or in films, in television station interviews. He said, in Brazil, we do not have just the cultural anthropology. We have a living cultural anthropology. And just a month ago, I was just told by one of my friends, liaise with me with the Cintas Largas. This is one tribe known for their violence in the past 10 years. And they don't speak. For them to speak Portuguese is almost a pain, because between them, they sing to each other. Just imagine. Reflecting on all this I'm talking about, Indians, the language is being handled by sound, by music. Immediately echoing one of the Chinese, as you were saying, this broadcasting, this particular time, I would do this in English, I would do it in Chinese, I would use my mother tongue, Cantonese. But with the technology, I think in what we speak, in the caption side, in the using the YouTube plus others, very quickly this can be adapting to the native tongue, native language, and probably much easier from Cantonese to Putonghua or the Mandarin. I can speak Putonghua, but I have chosen to using the mother tongue, and just to see the response between my English broadcasting, the Portuguese, and then Cantonese. Going back to this cultural link, and over the years, I can still read and write Chinese, but in the best known work of Confucius, or Kongzi, and there was a mention about all the writing he had. It's called 4 books and 5 scriptures. 四书五经. It's like 5 scriptures. As we all find out, there was more than 5. There's a 6th one that nobody had spoken about. The 6th scripture of Confucius, which basically is about music. And how can you transfer music over the time and period? And so that part of the musicality has been neglected. Many have spoken. Confucius is a very tall man, maybe 1.7 meters. He sings loud and using his sword, dances with sword. So these are the motion, sound of the past history that has been a little bit avoided, neglected due to not enough exposure or connecting phonetic sounds. But today we can. Technology of AI, the technology, what we have today, very possibly we can find extra sounds. On this point, I'm not bouncing, I'm just linking from Chinese, the 4 books, 5 scriptures, in Cantonese called 四書五經. I have the rich experience. In my days when I was teaching English before I come to college to make extra earning, I have actually used most of the songs. Songs were taught by the missionaries. I'm just assuming the Americans, or in the early days in Macau days, the biblical songs and also songs like Michael Rowed the Boat, or the Christian songs. When I have told my friends that I had the exposure to learning Greco-Roman or Latin and Greek during my early years, starting at 8 years old when I was baptized in Macau, also within the schoolings, the school belonging to the Salesians, the John Bosco or Giovanni Bosco from Italy, or from Turin. And I was baptized, interestingly enough, also a very colorful group of the Jesuits. Is the school from the Matteo Ricci. His very first mission in China was located in Macau. Both Father Minelli from Italy and Father Luis Ruiz from Spain had me baptized. This how we have been going back and forth, eventually engaging back. When I left Macau, speaking only Cantonese and some English, learned from a very basic. And returning 25 years later, we share our share of the Spanish, Portuguese, a good portion of Italian, and then we're talking about the learning about Latin and Greek. What I have found it interesting, because my family always teaches me, or my sister said, "Now, when did you ever learn Greek?" They don't teach Greek. My learning of the Greek is not the written language. It's all by sounds. And based on my own research at this point about the migration of languages, not just the Chinese in the different dialects and how many dialects are closer to the early Chinese language in sound, but in my experience of Roman Catholic, given the name, my name Paul is given by that cathedral in Macau called São Paulo. It was burned and only left the front facade for the visitors. Everybody goes to Macau to São Paulo. And then from São Paulo Cathedral, my name carried me to Brazil, landed in the state of São Paulo on the port of Santos, and moved into the city of São Paulo. And then the name São Paulo, Paul, and going back to see the Catholics, wondering in the time of the Christians in Judea, they may know Hebrew, but the common language very likely is Aramaic, and from Aramaic transfer to the Greco-Roman side of this Jew scholar from Tarsus, Turkey, and the whole bridge, the gapping between the transferring from the Aramaic language into the future Latin, in between Greco. This is what the Greco coming from. As I have been repeating of the sounds of the singing the high mass, I have detected a certain scale of the Greek sound, the chant, where it had allowed the Latin words and singing to be much better enunciated. Just pick the simple song, Kyrie, Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison. All the sound in different songs, I can carry in the same Gregorian tone in Cantonese, in Shanghai, in Mandarin, in Spanish, Portuguese, and in English. So this is one of the reason I am expanding on this exploration of language, sounds, cultures, and how have I moved my communication dynamics, communication analytica, the cultural sphere, now culturally, anthropologically, from my journey going west to now my journey today heading back east. And but what's funny, that is all these transitions of locality don't have to be done physically. I am in my surrounding, my own room, in the use of the computer, with the use of the camera, and in the use of the participation of different kind of communication formats. My communication dynamic and the communication analytica can be done right here as we share at this moment. And this is why I hope my friends, and in the future, I look forward to have more colleagues to work together, because I don't think in what I have developed at this evolution of the spheres from the three C's, cultural dynamic, cultural analytica, and the cultural spheres, is now emerging into another cultural spheres of the psychology round and square. And let me make this very direct to the Western audience. A little bit of history in bits and pieces. I have always been fascinated about the global explorers, right, wrong, or indifferent. Just as much I am speaking again and again about the Brazilians, as I opened in Facebook, called the Jam Explorer. Okay, because this exploration, definitely exploration eventually came with exploitation also. But exploring that the different dimensions. Let me speak of the perspective today, a little bit tying to the constant hostility, strong or mild, by the American policy working for China, against China, with the technological dispute in the technology and whatnot with the chips. I would like to remind my Western friends that based on my personal research, or ever since the 1492, when Columbus had found America with the obvious mistakes, direction aiming at China, Asia, India, then end up calling the American natives Indians. Life is full of errors. Rights and wrongs can eventually be eradicated by those of us who takes part and who would like to say, let's correct this misconception. Okay, I just want to remind all my friends everywhere, from Europe, from Brazil, my beloved Brazil, and here, since 1492, the Western expansion had not stopped. And the expansion, first by these Iberian folks from Portugal, from Spain, then eventually had gone into the English, then the Dutch, the English, French, and whatnot. The colonization was further enriched, expanded by the technology of the steam engine of the English. And the battles and the colonization of the East Coast and the colonization of India there was no dispute between the Chinese fighting the English or the Indians fighting the English. The superior technology, which Japan had embraced early by their modernization in that particular time and era. And even today, this kind of Western expansion would come in with a paradigm, the Industrial Revolution in England, and then eventually the Industrial Revolution of energy, petroleum, gas, and the engines of America. Only now, the next round of the industrial or technological evolution is coming to the area of the digital age and coming to the artificial intelligence and whatnot. But in all these 500 plus years, there are very little engagement in knowing the culture of the Chinese, the psychology of the Chinese, and the much richer context that have not been taken note. And furthermore, because English is the lingua franca after the Romans, Latin, from Roman Latin, eventually turned into the five other vulgar language, not vulgarity, but it was also called the language spoken or descending, coming from the Latin groups. I speak Portuguese, I speak Spanish, I have a good grasp at 80% of Italian, so the three language already coming down from the post-Roman era, plus Italian, and then Romanian. In all that time, this lingua franca had produced the five different languages, or returning back to the early linguistic group, with the added wordings and phrases and expressions under the Roman Empire. The English had become the lingua franca for this last 300 plus years. And subsequently, in this scale, the world is Anglo-American centered. And for all this time, even with the rise of China in its economics, along with part of the technological and advancements, there are very little the West has spoken the good or the virtues of the Asians, and more specifically, China. And what also I found it very interesting, by not knowing deeper or modifying changing the perception of Chinese, the Western scholars have the tendency to put everything into ism, like Catholicism, religion, Islam and Judaism, Protestantism, the ism, the ISM to the N, and put everything suggestively hinting religion. So we have Confucianism, we have Taoism with a T today, some modification, Taoism, you can use a D. And then we have Buddhism, the rich discipline coming from India. But none of the three, faith, that's already a wrong term, none of the three are any isms. The teaching in this collective terms of the Asian representing China, representing Asia by ism, is one huge psychological mental mistake. Because when you're associating religion, you're making association with deity. When you're making association with deity, you're looking for the monotheistic. The any other polytheistic cultures in society may be the less significant. And so I think part of my work on the cross-cultural psychology and the cross-cultural communications, now with the psychology round and square, it had reflecting back to me. I'm journeying, I will be journeying for the longest time, but I'm journeying back to East. As you shall see in all my designs, drawing using all the spheres, the cultural spheres, that round and square, I was actually very much inspired in my graduate school years, going through all the phases of the Freudian psychology, which is starting from Austria, Vienna, and in part or in whole, Sigmund Freud, as an ethnic Jew, were not allowed to be in the medical school or practice in Vienna, in Austria. The creation of the psychology, again, cross-culturally, Freud had borrowed from the Greek mythology or the Greek stories about Oedipus. Eventually they add the Electra, so there's this similar pattern, that obsession or the attachment to the mother, and the Electra, the attachment to the father. Through this cross-cultural study and analysis, Sigmund Freud created psychology. And from the psychology, by the time happened with the Nazi Germany in the Second World War, psychoanalysis had brought into the fruition in the East Coast, North America, New York, and that's become the very elite, costly psychoanalysis, psychotherapy, where, to make this a little shorter, I will repeat this process. By my creation of the psychology in round and square, it came with my reading of all this evolution of people, moving from counseling, therapeutic psychology into the realm of engagement of education, be that Piaget, with names throwing out, Rollo May, Alfred Adler, and in between you get Eric Fromm, and I have embraced the teaching of Carl Rogers because his method, you can say method, or his metrics and his framework is about people's congruence and about the unconditional positive regards. But there's more of a personal discipline in the way he approached to his patients, friends, or clients. So psychologists moving with my time. And when I see and studying Eric Burns' transactional analysis, and how Eric Burns, in the use to adaptation to the Freudian superego, ego ID, to his parent spheres, adult and child. I just had one of the biggest awakening. I do not take all that I have developed, the practicality and my use of the psychology round and square by myself. It is a series, a sequence of the study of psychology and development that have provided me in 75, 74, and this particular development of the communication dynamics. When I use the round and square, it's because in the Anglo-American cultural context, we do hi, we say hello. I think hi coming from greeting from the cowboys. You're too distant when in horsebacks. You cannot reach over to shake hands. But in Brazil and in South America, we are good friends, man. We hug, we embrace. We do back to back, front back, the full embrace. So from the transactional analysis of Eric Berne, I had developed and evolved with the other figure, the other element, which is square. The psychology round and square is very simple. It's a psychology where I have also influenced by the work of Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire just gave me one word. In Portuguese and Latin, a very simple to talk about conscientiza, to conscientize, or conscientização, the conscientization. And from that one phrase, and from the work of Paulo Freire, from his idea about conscientization, it also influenced and impacted my development of the round and square. And it's very, very interesting from Paulo Freire as a catalyst, as the influence of thinking had brought me back in this last 40 years, the Chinese concept of the round and square. It's a balance. The psychology of round and square is nothing mystical. It's very simple. How did the West or Westerners would take my presentation of the psychology round and square? For one thing, it's a balance, it's an evolution, change, the mechanism, flipping back and forth. The rulers rule the country. When the rulers rule with rigidity, the people will rise and rebel. It's the round of the people that can wrap around the square and then go back to the square again. And this idea about the round and square is every single day repeating many times in my mind, but never knew what they were. What Chinese so-called 规矩, the rule of law. The round and square to express to the most simplistic way to the Westerners, to the rank and file that not requiring any education, how much we love football or soccer in Brazil. You play soccer using a round spheric ball, but you play the rules according to the field, which is square or rectangular. Same thing goes with basketball. Same thing goes with tennis, which I play 3 times a week. So when you have the confine of the square and the ball is being played on that confine and no over rigid, I don't want to be political, we all understand the round and the square. Almost any sports, ping pong table, tennis. Now you talk about pickleball, right? The square lines and the round moving ball. So when I have developed the round and square, I'm also thinking about, in this last 40 years, I kept on asking my Salesians, missionary workers, and teachers. I said, we are so dedicated to the poor. After the First World War in Italy, that's how John Bosco had created a school for the orphans or kids, children being abandoned by the family. He had his universal idea about education had gone as far when he went to Spain to offer the Jewish refugees the same educational concept and application in Europe. And I was fortunate enough as a youngster who had gone to the school in Brazil, in Macau. Why? Many Chinese, using almost a little bit of a cool air to say, well, you're too westernized. In the Cantonese, it's almost funny. They call us juxing. Still, it's not quite clear, but juxing means a bamboo with 2 knots. Some of the American-born Chinese, we call them juxing because you're 2 knots. You're not reaching neither side, the Chinese or the American. But regardless, we can using those terms in a better form. This kind of a disconnect. And I found psychology, with all that I have learned, or as much in the format that I have learned, they have not reached the general population. And this is where I felt I can be of value to Paulo Freire's Institute for the schoolings in Brazil. As raised as a Roman Catholic under the order of Salesians of John Bosco, there have always been a very sound mission is to deal with the poor people. We call it oratorio on Sundays. We provide them with playing fields, food, feeding. Yes, this is a church service. I kept on asking myself, what happened with all this bullet flying in Rio de Janeiro, with all the favelas? Okay, people like you have watched Cidade de Deus. You have seen the kind of trouble we have in that kind of setting in Brazil. You can go back to history. Sure, the rich and the poor have always lived side by side. The rich have living on the plain area of the beach of the land. When the hill you have to climb, you have to walk. It's a bit more of a burden to do all that. But with the 60s, when the famine or the drought happened in Brazil, all this northeastern Brazilians have migrated to São Paulo, to Rio, but Rio become the great growth of this shanty town. There's no provision of services and also no schools and no infrastructure. I kept on pressing my Salesian priests, clergy, and teachers. Why are we not in the favelas? If our mission is to help the poor, our mission is provide education for those who have less access. Going back to the point when Chinese accuse me we are overly Western and not Chinese enough. And I have to defend, not when I'm saying this, not just me alone, but for the most Chinese who left China after the conflict between the Kuomintang, the National Party of Chiang Kai-shek, who fled to Taiwan, and Mao Zedong and the communists. Our own family have those split parties. And collectively, these are the situations that when my father took us to Hong Kong and my mother eventually moved us to Macau, as good as nice the Portuguese colonizers in comparison to the British, neither one of them had provided education or schooling, or until later in Hong Kong, because they need civil servants. They wanted people to be able to service the administration of the British and also the merchants. My family, my sisters, and my brother, we are a family of 4. For my side of the family. In those days, China was putting almost into a black zone. We are not going back. We can only go outwards. In the immediate overseas Chinese population, many in Macau and Hong Kong, you see many homes have no male figures. They've gone to Malaysia. They go to Luzon. Luzon, actually the island of Philippines. They, in reference of the Philippines, is Luzon or Luzon. I thank my mother for the wisdom. Even my grandmother from my father's side asked my mother, make sure the youngsters will have go to separate schools with separate genders. And the only provision of this kind of schooling with all boys and all girls with the schools by the Roman Catholics. So for those Chinese who may want to pointing at us that you are overly westernized, you don't have enough Chinese content in your life, I don't make excuse. On my journey back, on this talk about the psychology round and square, in part or in whole, it's part of my, not defense, the clarification of this once solely for the Jewish terms of the diaspora. the exile or exiting the ethnic group of the many Chinese. I just developed a psychological term that I think this has universal applications, a psychological symptom. I name it diasporia. Diasporia, from the maybe conjugated from Latin diasporium, diasporia. And I think from this point onward, I hope I will have a great audience, and I will repeat, I will broadcast the similar speak in Portuguese we call fala. I don't call it the presentation of any sort of lecturing. It sounds a little bit condescending. I would like to involve more people to think and or to join me about the three C's and think more about the psychology round and square. And by your feedback, you shall see me in English, in Portuguese, and also in Cantonese Chinese. I'm doing so in part is to I think this most deservingly, I am forever grateful from this transition and living experience in Brazil, even though I lived only 5 years. But for my 45 years in business with the gemstones and minerals, I have lived daily with the Brazilians. I'm indebted to you. Muito obrigado. Thank you. Xexé. I hope to see you soon. Goodbye.